Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads for this week's live stream and Q&A. Hopefully, you're all having a great Tuesday so far. We're going to dive into the latest in the world of Star Wars, talking about some of the news stories from the past week, as well as taking your guys' questions, your comments, anything you'd like to discuss in the chat. It can be Star Wars related, non-Star Wars related, whatever you'd like to discuss. Leave it in the chat room over here. Make sure you're hitting that like button. Really helps out our channel. It's one of the best ways you can show your support, especially non-financially. If you want to financially contribute to the channel, we do have Patreon, YouTube membership programs. If you join, you do get priority chat access. If you are of a certain tier, you also get videos early and all sorts of stuff like that. So check out the perks over there, see if there's something right for you. If you are new, subscribe to the channel. We do this every single week. Every Tuesday, we go live talking about the latest in Star Wars news and taking your guys' questions. So you know when we go live, and make sure you turn those notifications on so you know when all our videos are up. We also have a lot of other video content coming out for you guys. We just put our review out for the newest Star Wars novel, Bad Batch Sanctuary. It is a kind of a weird placement for the book, but it takes place towards the end of season 2 of the Bad Batch. We enjoyed the book and we put up our review. So if you guys want to check that out, it is on the channel. Next video coming out will be the High Republic timeline, the complete timeline of all the High Republic stuff that's come out, short stories, books, novels, comics, all of that. And then we will also be giving you guys tier lists of our rankings of the best High Republic novels and the worst, as well as the comics ranked. And so, and we're going to do essential reads and recommended reading order and stuff like that too. So a lot of content coming out on the channel. Make sure you check out shorts as well, polls twice a day, every day. And without further ado, let's dive into tonight's stream. So our main topic tonight is kind of a carryover from last week, but right after we ended the stream, kind of the next day when the dust settled on the original announcement that Matt Smith was going to be in Star Wars Starfighter, rumors started speculating about what role he might be. We obviously knew originally from the report that he was going to be playing the bad guy. Well, Jeff Snyder, who often is involved with these leaks, especially around Star Wars recently. He's been doing a lot of stuff around Star Wars. Revealed in his newsletter that the character played by Matt Smith won't be a Jedi or a Sith or some type of dark side user. Supposedly, the character he will be playing will be some kind of military general in the film. And so that, I mean, kind of negates a lot of the stuff we talked about last week. I mean, everybody kind of wanted to see Matt Smith, I think, play some type of dark side user. He just fits perfectly in that mold. A lot of that carryover from his initial rumored appearances in The Rise of Skywalker and what he was going to be there. So I think for me personally, this is a little bit disappointing. But Sonic, what are your thoughts on the fact that Matt Smith is now pretty much all but confirmed to be in the film and he is playing an evil general, not a dark side user?
I mean, I guess they are definitely playing to his strengths, playing to like how online fandoms have kind of seen him. I, he hasn't necessarily played like a magic-ish role since Doctor Who, when he is the Doctor and has a bunch of random technology and abilities. So I guess in a way I'm disappointed, but in another way I'm like I don't think it closes the door on seeing some sort of Force-related background for his character. I think in a way, I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, if especially with this just being a half decade after The Rise of Skywalker, is actually dealing with, like, a lot of the questions surrounding the First Order versus the Final Order. I don't think that's very clear for general audiences, right? Like, you have the First Order, which is an insurgency, then you got this Final Order that has all these old Imperial-looking designs to it, but is Palpatine's plan. First Order is not really Palpatine's plan. Palpatine's plan was to destroy the Project Operation Cinder, to destroy all the Empire, to purge it, and what remained would then be part of his empire. Like, it's all, like, not contradictory per se, but it's just not smooth or clear. So having us actually be able to see a militarized perspective on like the state of the galaxy, which like we discussed last week, I don't think is going to be any way unified for the heroes. Maybe ally ships, but no unified government. I think we could see him be, like, someone who is part of, like, a First Order, turn, like, sort of good guy role, or he could be Final Order, like, remnant that's just dying by its Sith eternal ideals and all that, and I could see a lot of infighting between the 2 of them. I don't see it necessarily just being like, "Oh, because we all have kinda similar looking armor and we're all the bad guys, that means we're gonna all work together." That's never how it works in real life in Star Wars, no, it's not really a thing there, so I think seeing, like, a bit more like First Order versus Final Order, what these different hero factions are, and, like, seeing how it all kinda interweaves together. Maybe we get to see part of it happen because Gosling's character with his nephew or whatever, like, they run into the battle and they're like, "Whoa, what are you doing here?" Like, this is n like a hotbed of everything going crazy right now. I think that could be a good way, honestly, for it to be a way to just address, like, one of the biggest problems I think everybody has, fan or hater of the sequels. What is happening in the greater galaxy? What is the state of the world building? What is the state of the galaxy? This is a great way to, like, not only go off of, like, the classic Star Wars feel of, like, battles and everything to really explain, like, what's going on just visually, but also just to, like, give us some great action sequences to let us touch upon what was left by The Rise of Skywalker in a way that's, not necessarily, like, wordy or has a lot of prose to it or anything like that going on. So, I think this could be pretty good. I think he could maybe catch on to what's going on with Gosling and all that, and then from there, be like, "Okay, no, no, this is a good way to, like, gain some power, gain some favor, right? Or, like, be assigned to this sort of mission to then follow up on them." 'Cause I don't necessarily see a general per se finding out about Gosling's nephew being force sensitive and being like, "I'm sending my whole fleet across." This is not a very Vader-esque situation where he's hunting down his son. Like, there is probably no real personal connection between Gosling and Matt Smith's characters, so I think this would be a good way to do it. If Mia Goth is above him or below him, whatever the power structure is, see her use her military personnel here. Oh, I think this could be pretty good. I'm quite excited for what comes next here for this, like, movie as a whole as it's shaping up to really start filming here at the end of fall, beginning of winter period, so yeah, pretty
Yeah.
excited.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one exciting thing for sure, and I still would prefer him to be just a traditional dark side user. Like, I think that would just be cool. I want to see what the next evolution of that's going to be. We're going to get more dark side users in the future at some point. Want to see what the next step is for that, but it doesn't have to be in a movie like Starfighter. I mean, Starfighter in general just kind of sounds like something that would have a general as a villain. Sounds like it's something that's smaller, more self-contained. I'm sure they want it to be a franchise, but it's something that I think they just want to be a good movie. And so, right off the bat, it sounds a little bit more retro, more old school, more classic Star Wars, that dogfighting style, right? That makes more sense if it's a dogfighting movie, if it's really a military movie for Star Wars. It makes more sense to have the villain also be some type of military genius. So I think that's really interesting. Now, General is, probably the wrong title for him. I would imagine if it's space movie, he's an admiral, but he said a general-esque character, so it's not like specifically he's going to be a general, but he is a military, high up military, officer. And so I would imagine he's an admiral because he'll be commanding some form of a imperial or first order or whatever navy against the Starfighter. So we'll see where that goes. I think the one positive, though, is that it probably means we are going to get remnants of the First Order and Final Order, like you're saying. And that to me is exciting because I don't want, even though the sequels, especially The Rise of Skywalker, I think they would like to kind of brush under the rug. For lore purposes, you can't completely ignore them. You have to kind of touch on certain things about them. And so if you're going to touch on the fact that Palpatine had this massive fleet there at Exegol and they all got destroyed, and all the millions and maybe billions of people who were staffing those ships and all the different things around that. Like, there's so many implications for bad guys that could be around, not just from the First Order remnants, but in the Final Order that's there. So you have the Final Order defeated, but we really never see the actual First Order defeated. They just lose their figurehead. So now where do they go? Right. And so I want to see some type of remnant thing. Like I want to see, even if it's the last vestiges 5 years later, last vestiges of the First Order, it's dwindling, it's basically gone. Maybe you can go Legends esque, and they kind of have a treaty with the New Republic or whatever they're called, the New Republic, and they have this kind of territory that they're marked in, and maybe Ryan Gosling and his child go into the wrong place at the wrong time, and they get attacked, something around those lines. But I would like to see some payoff for the previous lore, so not only it gets a little bit better, because we've often said on the channel, and I've often said that you can't really fix the sequels with anything Clone Wars esque, because Clone Wars fit in between a big gap between movies. The sequels only have a 1 year gap between episode 7 and episode 9, so it's almost impossible to fix it with something like that. You need to fix it by doing stuff with the back half or the back end of the trilogy and the front end of the trilogy. And so if you just wipe away the back end of the trilogy and be like, let's move on to this, then I think you lose an opportunity to make those better. So I'm glad they're going to be touching on some of that stuff with that lore. It seems like, at least, he could be some type of admiral from some long lost government or some unknown Regis government that's risen during the conflict between the First Order and the New Republic, risen maybe in the last vestiges of the Empire, and lived on this in this outer rim, post outer rim expansionist area that just like is creeping in. Maybe a tie into what they might do with New Jedi Order with Rey, whether you go with like extra galactic threats and that type of stuff. He could be part of some other faction, but at least we're getting a little bit of governments and maybe military and stuff like that that helps build out and flesh out the world. So I'm kind of all for that. I want to see something like that, but I still would love, like, Matt Smith is just such a good villain that he seems like he'd be so good for a dark side user. But we can't have all our British bad guys be dark side
Yeah,
users, I
yeah.
guess. So we'll get hopefully a good one later on. But what are your guys' thoughts on Matt Smith now being confirmed to be some type of military officer? The word used was general, but do you think he'll be an admiral? Do you think he'll do something else in the military? Do you think he'll be First Order, Final Order, some type of other Imperial remnant, some type of other government admiral, general? What do you think? Let us know in the comments. We have a couple comments about this. Rebel Sith 18 says, "Yo guys, what's up? Just popping in. I was stoked about Matt Smith, but a military general, please no. I really hope Snyder's wrong on this one, but maybe Mia Goth will be his dark side saber wielder. But you're right, they need to somewhat acknowledge the politics and remnants. Mia Goth could be a former cultist leader." Yeah, those are all great ideas as well, and I think they absolutely could connect the two. And like Sonic was kind of alluding to as well, like, you don't he could have the Force and still be an admiral. Um, but you don't I just don't see, he's not gonna be a traditional dark side user if he's some type of general or admiral. Um, he might just kind of be like Ryan Gosling, like revealed to be also force sensitive, but not somebody who's been putting it into practice his whole life. So it could be that way, but yeah, I'm with you, Rebel Sith. But I think it could be cool to see maybe a dynamic duo of bad guys here between him and Mia Goth if they do team up and if she is a force sensitive.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it could be interesting to, like, leave him as just a very British villain, right, in Star Wars. Like, you could just have him in charge of some sort of naval fleet that's, insurgency or fighting back against Final Order or whatever. Like, it really does depend on just how congruent the First and Final Order forces are gonna be. Like, we don't really see, like, First Order in Exegol, right? It's not like they're all just accumulated there, right? There is, a couple, like Pride and his forces. Pride has always been, in a way, working for Palpatine, right? So a lot of Exegol and everything in the Battle of Exegol is between the Resistance and the Final Order, which is stopped from launching out everything. So could a lot of them be gone? Sure. Could I see the First Order be taken over by a Sith Eternal? Be a lot harder when most of your ships are gone and destroyed and your great leader is just absolutely obliterated, right? Like, there's a lot of things, like, just that could, should, would, right? But again, this is Star Wars, people will find a way to find an interesting enough idea and story to make it happen. We know the Sith Eternal, like you brought up Rebel Sith, like, they have a role in the galaxy, even, like, years and years before. They don't necessarily all have to be on Exegol, so, having him be a final order, admiral of some sorts, a captain of some sorts that's been, like, brainwashed from his childhood on Exegol onwards, like, that's a perspective we have 0 understanding of, right? It could also just be First Order, 100%. First Order who's kinda disgusted, like, "No, we were really what the Empire was reforged into, and now you're telling me, like, Palpatine wanted to do something else, like, we weren't even part of his plans, like, who's real, who's not, right?" Like, these conflicting legacies and, you know, power struggles over and legacy of Snoke, like, all these things I think have to be addressed and mostly will be with supplementary material, but when it comes to military forces, which I think are some of the better depicted parts of the sequels, this is a great way to, like, let us have, like, a perfect stand-in for, like, how does somebody controlling a galaxy through a navy, like, react or reflect on, like, what has just happened in the last 7 years or so, right? Like, this could be a really great perspective. So, yeah, I mean, I could also see, the Force Awakening playing a role here too. Like, it's a name for Episode 7. It, awakens in Finn, it awakens in Rey, it's awakening in sorts in Kylo despite his training and all that. We've kinda seen it be explored a little bit with, the awakening of, like, the brainwashed First Order soldiers with not just Finn, but Janna and her whole crew. I wouldn't be surprised if, like, maybe there is an awakening of all these other people at this point in time, right? Now that the Dyad has been connected at just 5 years before and all that, like, maybe, like, this Matt Smith character just thinks he's some sort of military genius, but he's being aided by the Force, and that maybe gives him a leg up on Mia Goth, who's, been able to use the physical martial traits of the Force. Might be some just crazy cult kid who's got the Force with them from the Sith Eternal or whatever, right? Obviously, Gosling might also awaken. This kid presumably is awakening, like, again, like Liam said, kind of playing out with the concepts and the ideas postulated by the sequels in the back end. That's where majority work's gonna be. I still do think a lot can happen between 8 and 9, but I think it's gonna be more for, like, original characters for them to then appear later on in this era or to have a bit more of a role pre-Episode 7 and then maybe conclude in between 8 and 9, and then whoever starts growing as a character between 8 and 9, then jumps into this post-sequel era. It's not gonna be as clean as Clone Wars, which, admittedly is also very pushed together. That's 7 seasons, plenty of time if you're on all that for 3 years of war, like, that it's a lot, I get it, it's a whole galaxy, but 1 year is even harder, and you don't wanna make it start feeling like homework like a lot of franchises have been kinda dealing with. It's like, "Oh god, like, I have to go back to understand these films that I saw a decade," like, no, you don't wanna do that. I think everybody's sort of getting tired of that, so do some, but more just deal with, like, yeah, we're after Episode 9. Here we go. Some concepts that started there, we can reintroduce, semi-reboot with these new characters like Matt Smith, who, Admiral or not, maybe has something to do with The Force Awakening back in 2015.
Rebel Sith also says, you guys read Shadow of the Sith, right? What if Mia Goth is the new possessed of the hook saber and mask of Exum Panchard, if that's his name? Wasn't the girl with the sickle saber and mask connected to the Sith Eternal cultists in that book? I can't recall, but I'm pretty sure she was. That's how Luke finds her through her former cultist friend, right? She was not Sith Eternal, but she was connected to another group called the Acolytes of Beyond, which are kind of like a almost a precursor slash like sister group to the Sith Eternal in a lot of ways. They have obviously direct connections to Palpatine in that book and Ochi, and so they kind of work together. But technically, she's a member of the Acolytes of Beyond, but that's also a really cool theory as well. I'd love to see that come back. Exum Penchard's one of my favorite new Sith or new designs, new characters that they've introduced in the literary side of Star Wars canon. And so that would be something really cool to bring back, especially with Luke gone. Um, it would be interesting to see how the heroes handle that. Now, might be too big or too powerful of a character for something like Starfighter, but maybe a recurring foe who appears throughout the stuff in this kind of rumored cinematic universe that they're creating around the post Rise of Skywalker stuff, revolving around Rey and Rey's New Jedi Order and whatever the Simon Kinberg trilogy is and all this other stuff that's coming. That could be a cool recurring character and a way to bring back the Sith without like bringing back the Sith, because if you want to keep the death of Palpatine 2.0, you could bring in a mask that's enchanted and bewitched by a former Sith, but yet isn't technically going to make somebody a Sith. So that could be something pretty cool. And they've done that a lot in Legends as well, with finding holocrons, of Exar Kun, all sorts of things that bring back the Sith before the one Sith eventually return. And so I'm all on board for that, and I've said many times before too, I'm on board for the Sith returning in a different form. Obviously, it can't be the Baneite form. Like, I feel like the Chosen One prophecy is the one that kills the Baneite form of the Sith, snuffs out the Sith really in general, but you could have another offshoot brand of dark side users that don't have to call themselves Sith, that can be around and there to fight. Like, I'm not opposed to that, because you're going to need to do that at some point if you're going to keep telling force sensitive stories. I'd love them to just ignore that completely for now. Like, it would be cool if they actually could find a way to create a threat as big as the Yuuzhan Vong was in Legends, where you didn't need the dark side to be a part of that story. And they had a threat that really impacted the Jedi just as powerfully. It would be cool if they could figure out a way to do that for now. But at some point, the dark side is coming back. It's just a matter of time. And so that could be a cool way. I would love to see that mask return. I'd love to see that character return.
Unfortunately, the Max, I was just looking it up on Wikipedia, 'cause it's been a while since I think both of us read of Shadow of the Sith. It is
3 years.
destroyed in the final battle, right? It's what helps free
Right.
Kiza, allows her to die. But yeah,
Mhm.
I wanna see more Panchart because he is a fascinating Sith. We have no clue what time period he is. He doesn't really seem Old Republic, he doesn't seem anywhere near High Republic. There's just something very messed up about it, and we've kinda seen this also in, like, the Star Wars 2020 line of, like, Luke kinda going into a Kyber crystal and, like, visiting a Sith Lord there and kind of almost like Viceroy Penchard has his own sort of, like, way of, like, ruling, controlling, and draining people and all that, so, yeah, I mean, I like the idea of having Sith stragglers, like, the whole point of the Sith is, like, they kinda extend, or give up their power. So I like Sith kinda coming back. I don't want it to be as I don't know, I don't wanna be super goofy like how, like, a lot of Sith cults and, like, Imperial remnants keep on popping up, like, every 3 months in the, Bantam era of Star Wars, like, especially because there wasn't any planning that makes sense. Everybody wants their own version of the bad guys of the dark side. But, less is more, and when it comes, it should be different, right? So, for this sort of film, with it being titled Starfighter, I just don't see it being like, "Oh, here's, like, our new force." I could see teases of, like, the dark side and all that, and, like, have characters that are dark side users, but in a galaxy that has just had 3 films deal with these sort of pretenders in Snoke and Kylo who themselves never declared themselves as Sith. I think it'd be really interesting to just continue what comes off from them, like, if they have an influence, if you're reading, like, Legacy of the Vader, comics and all that, Kylo does quite a lot, and he does a lot to, like, go into his grandfather's legacy and, like, leave his own stamps and all that, so I'm very curious to see, like, upstarts and all that that are inspired by him, that are inspired by Snoke and all that, so very cool with the idea of, like, Sith holocrons, Sith, effigies and all that kinda being brought into play here. I'd love Panchar to be introduced into canon without overriding Shadow of the Sith, and since it's not Filoni, I think we'll be a bit more safe there because he's a little bit blatant about how he does his overriding, but yeah, I think we can see some of these dark side users kinda come into play here, and I just don't see them necessarily being the big bads, more like they're so underpowered, but they have access to, like, Sith texts and all that that are starting to overwhelm them, that are all like cancer that are taking over them because it's like a possession of some sort, or like they're inspired and then they're like, "I want more power, let's combine forces," even though there's no way a Sith is gonna really do that, right? Like, I wanna see stuff like that happen before the next big version of it happens, and I think a film like Rey's New Jedi Order, if Kinberg is working on episodes 10 to 12, that's when it should more properly happen. But having some of these upstart stuff, I think works well and lets you have Rey kinda have the same sort of situations as Luke does in both canon and EU, where, like, they're gonna fight off a bunch of different bad guys of different variabilities without, like, "Oh, Palpatine Spectre is coming back," or, like, the ones that they're showing up and so, I think it can work. Um, it's just a matter of, like, just how many and like, how powerful you really wanna make these villains be.
Well, I think too one of the things that's always fascinated me about Rise of Skywalker and what they did with Exegol is the idea of Palpatine constantly saying, "I'm all the Sith." This is like they basically kind of treat Exegol as if it's this like source of all power for the Sith, almost like this completely powered dark side world. And within that, I did a video years ago, 3, 4 years ago, when I was still doing the like how to adapt in the canon, talking about Darth Bane. And one of the places I had him find the holocrons of the Sith Lords was Exegol instead of, I believe, is Onderon in the previous book, or the Duxon, the planet, the moon, from Tales of the Jedi. And so I think by shifting a lot of that stuff to Exegol, having a lot of Sith history on Exegol, we know Korriban is a planet in canon, but it hasn't had the same significance, but that could be the, like, modern Sith homeworld, that could be the Sith Imperial homeworld, but the Exegol could be something more ancient, almost the way, like, we've created Jedha as this, like, ancient birthplace of the Jedi now versus what Tython is in canon, we still don't really know. You can experiment with different planets, and so with using Exegol, using the Sith Eternal, I imagine there's a lot of Sith artifacts and stuff like that. What does the New Republic do with them? Can the villains steal them, learn from an ancient Sith some teachings, manipulate and bastardize their beliefs into something of their own, without calling themselves Sith, try to become like a dark side prophet. Like, because the one thing I always have not had a problem with like the idea of destroying the Sith, but like not fully believe the chosen one prophecy meant, is that you can't really destroy the Sith because they're no longer a species that can be, wiped to extinction. They're not, a small group of people that nobody's really heard of. They're a long time religion that's been around forever. And so just the same way when we have the Jedi all but wiped out during Order 66, you can't kill the Jedi completely because the idea of the Jedi is still around and still in the galaxy. And so I don't think the Sith will ever truly die, or at least the dark side teachings around them, but it can be metamorphosized into something different. And I think they can absolutely do that. Now, again, I don't think Starfighter's the place to do that, but there can be some type of holocron, some type of other ancient artifact around Exum Panchard, something like that that can live on Exegol and maybe in Palpatine's like secret collection type of thing. We have all these different artifacts. Like, to me, that would be something pretty cool to do in the future if you want to bring back the dark side. But I'm with you, Rebel Sith. Like, I just don't think 5 years is early enough if you want to make what Ray did with Palpatine really matter. The only other way I see it is if you have a dark side user immediately after, is somebody who was powerful in the dark side, who might have been, a second or third in command to Palpatine on Exegol, who survived and then is now leading, some new group, remnant of the Sith Eternal. There's, I mean, two obstacles for me with that logically. One, the big one is, where was this person during the films? Because it kind of puts another plot hole of like, okay, if Palpatine's undead, not really powerful and in trouble, and people are attacking him, like, where is his second in command? So I think that would kind of you'd have to do a lot of explaining with that. It's not, maybe this person was helping the First Order, but if nobody's ever heard of them, where are they? What are they doing? Unless they've left Palpatine a long time ago. The second thing is you could explain away not having any Force users or any strong Force users on Exegol when Palpatine's there cultivating the Sith Eternal through just Palpatine's jealousy. Like, he doesn't want anybody else there who could rival him. So he's basically, if you're a dark side user, keep it quiet or he'll kill you. You could do something like that to kind of explain away why there's nobody else strong on the dark side in a Sith cult. But other than that, I can't really think of any other reasons why you couldn't just bring somebody out of the Sith Eternals. Say they survived, say they somehow escaped with other members and they form this new cult, and now you have to fight them again. Starfighter, not the right place, I don't think, to do that. But if they want to do that eventually, or they want to set up a villain, an overarching villain, maybe a bigger villain behind the scenes, behind Matt Smith, behind Mia Goth, they could do something like that. And I think it would be pretty cool that you build off of what has been set up, because the Sith Eternal is an idea that looks really stupid in The Rise of Skywalker, but something that has a lot of potential if you decide to explain it and expand upon it and make it this thing that's been around for millennia. If you make it where it's just this like weird group of people who get around and chant around Palpatine, then it becomes even more ridiculous. So they've got to do something with it and kind of expand upon it. And so I think the future movies is kind of the place to go. Rebel Sith says Shawn Levy has said there would be Force in the movie when he was talking about inspirations for writing the story. And says, my thoughts for this coming new Jedi Order era is that there will be new Jedi that will split into factions. One will be Rey's maybe traditional Jedi style. The other will break off to allow attachments and whatnot, be more of a grayer Jedi, but some of them will break away and fall fully to the dark side. We could have three factions, a dark, light, and middle. I think the new Jedi Order, if happens, will be true setup to that. One thing that is driving me crazy about the Rey movie drama is the fact that everyone is freaking out about her being the main character. You're that That's just not going to be the case. From the earliest leaks, it's been said that Rey will not be the lead, and eventually more an old Ben type character. I think new young actors will be the leads. I don't care if Rey is in it. She's just a side character. Makes too much sense. Yeah, so Rey, people call it the Rey Juice Jedi. People call it the Rey's Jedi Order because they announced the movie with Rey as the like person. They're like, we're bringing Daisy Ridley back, and she's going to be leading a new Jedi Order. From the leaks, it does. The original versions of the script made her sound like she was not really as involved. She was only an Obi-Wan or Yoda-esque character and took place far in the future. It sounded like the version they changed it to, that they announced at Celebration 23, was only 15 years after The Rise of Skywalker, and she was going to be a lot more of a central character. So we don't know for sure either way. We know there will be new characters. It's not just going to be a Rey, Finn, and Poe movie. There will be new characters, whether it's Ryan Gosling and his crew from Starfighter, whether it's characters that are supposedly going to be in this Simon Kinberg movie. There will be other characters populating this timeline. There will be, if you want to treat Rey, Finn, and Poe as Han, Luke, and Leia, there will be the Kip Durons, there will be the Kyle Katarns, there will be the Corran Horns of this generation involved in those stories. So you're not going to just get only those three characters. So I agree with you that people are kind of overreacting to that specific thing, but they are reacting to it only because they announced it as the Rey movie. So that's the main reason. Secondly, as for the gray Jedi thing, I've never been a huge fan of gray Jedi because I understand the idea, but I think the word Jedi can't really be a part of that, because obviously the Jedi, you're in a specific group, right? But I understand the idea of trying to have some type of middle ground Force user. We see that a little bit already in the Ahsoka show with the Dark Jedi, and Dark Jedi has kind of always been the term for that. It's somebody who's gone towards the dark side, but are almost sometimes anti-heroes, most of the time bad guys, sometimes can be anti-heroes, who doesn't normally do the right thing, but can do the right thing, does have kind of mixed morals. So I see you could have a faction in that regard, but personally, I'd love to see that come out of Rey's Order. Like, I would love to see them actually go into Rey's Order, show her teaching, show what the difference are between her and the traditional Jedi Order before you have split factions come out. Like, I'd rather see the factions fall apart and split and change like we do kind of in Legends when Jedi break away or Jedi decide to do their own thing, like Kip and New Jedi Order. That makes it a little bit more interesting because you as a viewer are like, well, I kind of like this character. Do I agree more with what they're saying? Do I agree more with what Ray's saying? I think it creates dynamics versus if you just introduce these people as like, these people are anti-hero Jedi, these people are the good Jedi, and these are the dark side users. It's harder the story has to now get you on board with their decisions after kind of labeling them already. So I'd love to see them split and fall apart throughout the course of this epic saga if they're able to get, that going. But ideally, obviously, that means they do actually get this off the ground.
Yeah, I echo a lot of the same sentiments. Like Liam said, we don't really know the state of Rey's role in the film, but bringing her out on stage at least means that she's a lot more central to the story. And I don't think that's a bad thing in any way, right? Because you could still have her be a pretty important role, right? She could be like the third lead and have these two kids the way it's kind of been propositioned, like two of her Padawans and then her working in hand, right? And that's a great way for her to still take like a half step back and then only then like step fully forward when like, hey, they're in over their heads, they can't do anything, or like she needs to intervene, stuff like that. That's where you can see her be the master, which is, after 15 years, you're gonna be like, yeah, she's had a lot of time, a lot of training to build up her order, build up her own skill set and all that. So yeah, I don't see her being the lead per se, and then whatever 10, 11, 12 that Kinberg is working on or whatever his set of his films are, then we'll probably take more of that original concept from Lindelof of having, like, a 90-year-old Rey. I think it's just way too silly to have gone immediately to a 90-year-old, or I think, like, Helen Mirren was, like, rumored as, like, who he wanted to have be, like, Rey, and I'm just like, "Well, no." Just, like, when we're in an era of having stuff like streaming and all this multimedia franchising happen, jumping to a character's end of their story after we just barely saw their beginning is a brutal mistake to already happen. We've already got examples of Star Wars, right? We've had just that 30-year gap that you have to just account for, like, the real world aging of Mark Hamill. People are like, "Oh my god, like, I wanna know what's going on, like, why didn't we do Heir to the Jedi?" It's like, "Well, you can't. He's 60 something." Like, that's not how Heir to the Jedi works. Luke is going to Joru's Sabaoth because he's like, "Hey, like, you're an old Jedi from the original Galactic Republic. I can train under you, learn all these things, like, oh, Obi-Wan, all this blah, blah," like, that all matters to that character arc that goes on there. You can't really translate that and be like, "Oh, he's 60 years old, and now he found, like, an Order 66 survivor." 1, you're probably dead, and 2, like, it just doesn't really work for preserving that story. But, yeah, I mean, I do think that for her in general, whatever sort of Jedi she's gonna be, I think it's gonna be more so just the fact that we get to see her journey, and that's gonna be really important for all of us, like, to be able to say, like, "Oh, okay, here's, like, an animated series, and here's, like, a live action film, a couple spinoffs for her here," and then we get to see, like, that like, as long as you have all the big cornerstones established, then I'm fine jumping in between and all around. That's just the problem that we've had with Luke because it's such a new, like, attachment that we all have. It's like, "Oh, we've seen Luke's Jedi Order for 30 something years through his ups and downs, to not have even a glimpse of that of other than its destruction, that's what's, like, really hard for people to swallow because you're like then you see his characterization in The Last Jedi, even though I think that's the best acting that Mark Hamill has ever done as Luke Skywalker, it doesn't really sit for people if you don't at least understand why he got so low to be this sort of character, right? Um, and that's something that I think will ultimately be addressed, it's just not right now. So to make that same mistake with Rey would just be like, "Well, you didn't learn anything from that," and they've already made basically the same mistake with Vernestra in the High Republic, jumping ahead 100 years regardless of her species, and to have her in the Acolyte, and she's nowhere like what we think of her at the end of the High Republic. Sure, she can change, she can do all these things, but then when you read something like Acolyte Wayseeker, which is set 20 years before the show, you're like, "Well, she changed, but, like, she got older and a little bit more set in her ways and a little bit more stubborn about things." but nothing so dramatic since, like, all those life-altering things that are happening in the Nile conflict. Why is she so bureaucratic, middle manage like, that's so hard for us to swallow as High Republic fans, because 'cause we're like, "We don't really see that version of any source from the books coming through here." If we at least saw that version and she's still making those choices, then she probably sits a lot better for all of us, whether or not you like the show. At least you'll be like, "That's still Vernestra." For a lot of us, we're like, "Well, Heimer might have been her Padawan, she might have killed him or tried to kill him, like, any explanation, anything visual there, that would've been a lot clearer for us." So yeah, I think no matter what happens here, she is gonna be a central player, and we'll still get plenty fleshing out as long as we have Daisy Ridley involved in Star Wars, and then the character leading all the way up to whatever episodes 10 to 12 are happening. As far as your second point about, like, her being a more traditional Jedi, I think that kinda goes against the whole point of her character, like, at the end of episode 8, she's stolen away all the ancient Jedi texts. You literally see her open the cupboard and it's all there. That's why Yoda's like, she has everything she needs to know because he's being a little wisecrack here and being like, "Oh, no, she can lead with just 2 weeks of training from you, Luke." No, it's not that. Like, she quite literally has that, and she has the drive to be like how Luke was when he was younger, plus all the information that even he didn't have, that even Luke didn't have, Yoda and all, Jedis before Yoda didn't have, right? These are the original texts. So, I think it'll be very interesting to see what traditionalist ideas from the inception of the Jedi are gonna be, brought back again through Rey, but then her interpretation, what she agrees with, what she disagrees with, what she can get a lending ear from, Force Spirit Luke about, like, I tried a couple of these things from the High Republic. I tried doing stuff like, the Twilight of the Republic era prequel Jedi, like, and some worked, some didn't, right? I think we'll not only get a better understanding of his order, maybe we'll get to see some of the survivors of that, maybe some really old Order 66 survivors. Those will be kind of the characters that'll come in and be part of her training and teaching while she's, redirecting stuff all around, but I don't see her being traditional Jedi, like how we think of it as prequel. That just doesn't really fit in line with anything that the movies have actually kinda lined up for her. So, I think it'll be very interesting whatever happens. I agree with Liam. I'm not really a fan of the concept of, like, gray Jedi, but I do think that, like, stuff like Imperial Knights and stuff like that we have from Star Wars Legacy, especially with Legacy comics, presumably during the early Force Awakens leak days being a big influence on everything happening in 7 and 8 production at that time. It'd be really interesting if we follow up on that and see, like Liam was saying, maybe the Sith Eternal finally like, "Oh, we don't have to sacrifice our brightest and strongest in the Force to, like, revive Palpatine like human batteries or Force batteries. Now we can actually kinda let them loose and maybe see some more of those fanatical warriors and cultish warriors. Or maybe we can see stuff like the First Order people who, you know, decide they're brainwashing and all that, do truly believe in the Imperial policies, and they're like, "No, we need to be strong, we need to be unified." It'll be very interesting to see if they can pull off like an Imperial Knights through First Order stragglers who might, banded together with other coalitions and other groups of of the galaxy that have maybe actually been fine with them being under their rule. Maybe their life has been right. So I think you can do that sort of stuff. Rey, I think, will just be dealing more with like Order 66 Jedi, Luke's Jedi, the philosophical differences that are clearly gonna begin with Luke and how he's gonna change the Jedi from the time of his father, and then by the time we get to Rey, it's like, "Okay, here's another step, and now this is something that I have that is more pure than what everybody knows because it's the literal text from the inception of the Jedi." Does that make sense to Order 66 Jedi? Maybe. Does it make sense to Luke's Jedi? Maybe not. Does it make sense to mine? I don't know, but let's find out, and I think that'll be challenge, honestly, to really pull off, but I think that's where we're gonna still see, no matter what, Rey taking the Jedi on a different path than what Luke did, what the prequel Jedi did, what the High Republic Jedi did, what the Old Republic Jedi did, etc.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we should move on to our next set of questions here and stuff from the Q&A because we've gone for 45 minutes on this topic. But yeah, if you guys have more to say about this specific topic, keep firing into the chat. We'll get back to it as soon as we can. But yeah, I think we've had a lot of great discussion. Thank you for the comments, Rebel Sith. That was a fun discussion. And yeah, I'm glad you clarified what you meant, and we are on a pretty similar page with where we think that should go. I would just love them to actually get that opportunity to play a story like this out. I think, it's all obviously up to how much money these movies start making at the box office. I think Starfighter will be a pretty good start. Hopefully, it can be, the start of something bigger. Everything else remains to be seen. So it is a tough one because you can't necessarily go all in and plan these out fully without, having it possibly canceled. Excuse me. But you could, like I always say, still write it or write an outline for it and have a plan. And then if you don't do it, oh well, you paid a writer a little bit of extra money to outline something. But if you do it, then you're ready to go immediately when the movie is a success or if the movie is a success. But yeah, thank you for those comments. We're going to scroll up to the top and answer a few more comments before we get to our second topic of the day. So keep firing in those questions, your comments, theories, anything you'd like to discuss. Super chat bumps you up to the top, guarantees you on tonight's stream, helps out our channel. Also, if you want to join our Patreon or YouTube membership programs as well, they do have perks and certain tiers do have priority chat access. So if you want to join, you might be able to get priority chat access. If you see the stream in Patreon and you are a member of that tier, make sure you either DM us your questions on Patreon, DM us your YouTube handle so we can give you priority chat access, or comment just below the post on Patreon. If you are a YouTube member, you will get the ability to do so automatically. Brandon Tran kicks off the questions at the top tonight saying, non Star Wars question, which MCU movie do you think people will watch in 2026 between Avengers Doomsday or Spider Man Brand New Day? Well, which one will make more money? I still think Doomsday, even though there's been nothing that's really built towards it, even though Fantastic Four hasn't been performing as well as people hope, but still performed pretty well at the box office, at least opening weekend. I still do think Doomsday. Now, it is with the caveat that Doomsday is actually good. If it's not good, I do think Spider-Man. But I think Avengers right now, you look at all four Avengers movies, all of them have made at least $1 billion. Two of them have made $2 billion. One of them was the highest grossing movie for like almost a year of all time. We're still coming off of Endgame, even for the Avengers franchise, so that one has yet to be tainted. And when the marketing starts and you start seeing Robert Downey Jr. in the promotional stuff, and you start seeing characters like Thor and Doctor Strange, you start seeing the X-Men from Fox, you see Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen, and Ryan Reynolds teased that he was in it today, and we've been shocked if he's not, and Hugh Jackman. You start seeing all these characters. Plus, if Spider-Man's actually really good and it does get people excited for Doomsday, which will be the next thing, I just don't see any world in which Doomsday doesn't make more money. The only way it doesn't is if it's a catastrophic failure and it just is horrible, because that's the only way, because it will make a ton opening weekend. I think it will beat Spider-Man opening weekend. Even if the Spider-Man trailers have Hulk and Punisher in them, it will beat Spider-Man opening weekend. But right now, Marvel's not having as much of a problem on opening weekend. They're having a problem getting people to come back and watch it a second time. And that's been Fantastic Four's issue. That was Captain America, Brave New World's issue. Deadpool is really one of the only movies they've made in the last few years that's had that repeat viewings. Those people came back and watched it a second time. So we'll see. But I do think Doomsday is the front runner to make more money next year. And on top of that, it's in that coveted weekend before Christmas spot, which has now become probably the most profitable spot for any movie date of the year. It's better than anything in the summer. The Force Awakens came out that day. All three Star Wars sequels came out that day, as well as Rogue One, all billion-dollar movies. Avatar 2 came out that day, $2 billion movie. Aquaman came out that weekend. It made $1 billion. There's been so many billion-dollar movies that have come out that weekend. And even something like last year with Mufasa, which didn't do well opening weekend, had incredible legs because it came out on that weekend and stuck it out through Christmas. So I just think that's a huge bonus for it as well.
Yeah, and I don't think this will be an Avengers film like we've kind of been used to it being like a concluding act. Like if that had to have happened, it should have happened at the end of Phase 5 at minimum. Instead, we're in Phase 6, and the whole phasing thing doesn't work anymore because television has complicated so many things, right? And you see things that seem like surefire hits in a way like Daredevil Born Again supposedly got less viewership than Agatha and Ironheart did for its first couple weeks, which is crazy, and it's because a lot of people are like, "Well, it feels like a lot of homework," because everybody's telling me like, "Yeah, it was awesome that they recanonized and essentially set basically recanonized the Netflix stuff, but that's 3 seasons of a show that I need to watch now, plus Defenders," and that I get it, like, it is homework, and there is a fatigue in general. I think less so superhero fatigue, but more like franchise fatigue. Like, it's easy for you to walk into Superman this month and be like, "Yeah, okay, it's a fresh start. Sure, there's a bunch of superheroes, but I don't really need to know anything. I don't need to watch Creature Commandos to know this." Like, oh, some of those DC movies, like The Suicide Squad and Suicide Squad are kind of canon, but not really, and I don't really need to rewatch them until, like, they're clarified later in Peacemaker and all that. Yeah, it's easy. I don't think there's any issue with people kinda starting up again on any of these franchises. It's just the issue of, like, continuing franchises year after year, and with the output that Disney Plus had, it was just way too much. You can get away with that with books and comics and all these other, like, lesser selling mediums, right? Because you're gonna spend more time with a book. A book's not necessarily read in 2 hours. You're probably gonna take, like, a week or 2 because 'cause you've got other priorities going on. But because 'cause you're spending time in that world, you're always kinda, "Oh, man, I want a little bit more. I want a little bit more," till you finally finish and you're like, "Great, okay, I'm ready for the next one." You can't do that with, like, a TV show per se, especially when there's, like, 4 or 5 happening at once. You're like, "Oh my god." So, yeah, I think Marvel's having a lot of those issues with, like, the homework of it kind of all happening and homework for phases that don't really exist anymore, so it's like, are these all just individual stories? Are they supposed to be connected in any way? Are there supposed to be any real team ups? Not really. They've had some bad misses too, like, I think Marvels is probably better than Love and Thunder as far as, like, a follow-up because at least they're trying to do something there with Brie Larson's characterization. It just feels like it should have been a team up film after Captain Marvel 2 versus, like, Love and Thunder. You're like, "Wow, you got all the jokey kinda stuff out with Thor. What's gonna happen after the destruction of his whole civilization and by Thanos, the death of his brother, everything that arc that he goes through between Infinity War and, Endgame," and then you're like, "Oh, we're gonna go even more doubling down on the himbo-ness and then make everybody like that." The whole reason why that film worked is because you have him simply like that, and everything else is goofy, but there are stakes, but there was 0 stakes to Love and Thunder, right? So, stuff like that happening, obviously, unfortunate passing of Boseman, so you can't really have the intended Black Panther 2, which was gonna deal with him having left his people for 5 years and what they did without him and his guilt and all that around it. Like, there was a lot of things that changed for sure, but the homework of it, quality just dropping, like, it's hard for people to be like, "Oh, yeah, I'm excited," but the nice thing about Doomsday and the way that everything's been kind of trickled out is like, yeah, they're throwing in so many faces that are familiar, but they're also kinda treating it like how Infinity War does Thanos, where it's like, you're introducing your villain here. Sure, he might have had a little bit of teases and stuff like that. This is gonna be the villain story. Everybody's gonna, like, work around the villain, and it's gonna become clarified what their roles are, what the situations are like for them, and I think that's what's really gonna help. I think that's the fact that we have Doom. Yeah, it's maybe a little too late after Kang kind of being in the intended villain, but if you see Hugh Jackman, if you see all these characters that you've seen have been making money, right, like all these legacy characters, if you see the Fox X-Men, but with the X-Men '97 S costumes, like, the best of both worlds, like, I think people are gonna go crazy and nuts for that, right? They were already really excited to see Professor X's hover chair in Multiverse of Madness because 'cause they're like, "Yes, yes, getting more closer, more accurate to, like, the X-Men that we love and that we grew up on," right? So you get all the best elements, you keep it a story centered on the villain, introducing the villain. Yeah, you got a lot of people who are gonna be cut out, that's just a fact, but the ones that are gonna be put into play that have only had, like, an appearance to like Shang-Chi and all that, probably do get enough of, world building and development in this film before everything's, like, rebalanced out in Secret Wars. And I think at the end of the day, even if you aren't gonna love Doomsday, even if the whole Doom looking like Iron Man and Downey kind of possibly playing both roles thing doesn't pan out super well, all they gotta do is put out a Secret Wars trailer with, like, Hugh Jackman's Wolverine, Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, and, you know, Robert Downey's Iron Man of sorts in, like, a triangle, and then people are gonna be like, "Yep, that's $1 billion right there. I wanna see all that happen here." So, again, they know that they made a lot of mistakes here. They've slowed down their output. it's just hard to slow it down while it's mid-flight, right? Like, you can't it's a slow-moving ship, right? I think they're gonna just accept that the multiverse, whole shenanigans just didn't work out as well as they could have, and they're gonna tone it down, make stuff a little bit more grounded, deal with stuff on Earth mostly with the X-Men and all that, and yeah, I think things will slow down in general with superhero stuff, but I think Doomsday, once you see all those characters, once you see Doom's power and all that, I think that'll still clear the way because you're still gonna remember more of the positives of, like, the legacy MCU actors, the legacy Fox actors, and all that. And yeah, it sucks that Marvel's struggling with, like, new teams and new faces, but I think the fact that they've already seemingly been pretty public about committing to Fantastic Four 2 and all, we don't have to give up on that stuff. I think that everybody's expectations about these $12 billion films dropping down to more like 600, 700 because, China, box office revenue and all that. Once those things start normalizing, once the content's spread out, once TV is allowed to be a little bit more insular and only kind of give lore and world building to what's happening in the movies and not really have this back and forth that we're even seeing, in something like The High Republic being so much homework for people once it can kinda exist in their own domains. I don't think we'll have the issues that we're having in the Multiverse Saga. You might not ever make the highs of the Infinity War saga, but I think the quality and the consistency will all be there. And, yeah, Spider-Man will make $1 billion. I'm been very excited with what I've been seeing out of set. Practical suit with raised webbing, him being down on his luck, Spider-Man being down on his luck. People love that stuff, "Eat it up." That being said, when you see, like, 25 actors versus 1 actor,
Right.
I think you're gonna get a little bit more an interest there. Plus the fact that Spider-Man possibly does at least cameo in Doomsday, which, I mean, that already inflates whatever money they're gonna make by even more.
Well, and I think Spider-Man, one big thing to note about Spider-Man is yes, we are coming off a No Way Home, but neither Far From Home nor Homecoming made a billion, and Far From Home came out right after Endgame, so you would have thought it would have had that little bump because I mean, Captain Marvel, everybody uses that one as the example of like even that made $1 billion in the build up to
Yeah.
Endgame, right? And so Spider-Man, even though it's the most popular Marvel character, one of the most popular Marvel IPs they have in the MCU, it's not a guaranteed billion. I think the Hulk and Punisher will help, Hulk more so, but people haven't loved what has happened to the Hulk recently. Um, so it'll be interesting if they advertise him as like the actual Hulk versus this Professor Hulk version they've been going with. But yeah, I just don't see really anything preventing Doomsday from beating Spider-Man. Literally the only thing is if Doomsday is awful, and I mean awful, like not just not that good. It has to be awful because it has to like it will make a lot opening weekend. Like Spider-Man No Way Home made 250 or something opening weekend, and that was you could probably argue the last big multiverse crossover team up movie we've had. I mean, even more so than Deadpool, because right, Deadpool was just kind of advertised as Deadpool and Wolverine. That one had Toby returning for the first time in 20 years. Like that's probably the last big crossover superhero movie we've had. If you look at it that way, and even if you want to compare it to Deadpool, like both of those movies did well internationally. Almost no superhero movies since the pandemic have done well internationally. So Spider-Man, Deadpool both have team ups, both have crossovers, do well internationally. Does Spider-Man Brand New Day with just Hulk do well internationally? I don't know. And I think Doomsday will have a huge opening weekend internationally and domestically. And I think its opening weekends will be big enough by themselves to kind of take out Spider-Man. Not just with one weekend, obviously, but like get it close to maybe Spider-Man's total box office gross to the point where it would have to, like, drop 80% like the Marvels for it to not get there, and the only way it does that is if it's terrible because it's people are gonna go back and watch it probably at least one more time, Doomsday, and so it needs, like, a it needs to be like Batman versus Superman kind of thing, where like nobody goes back and watches it again. And on top of that, it also needs to be like 2.5, 3 hours for nobody to watch it again as well. So there's a lot of factors, but yeah, I don't see any world in which Doomsday doesn't beat it. But thanks for that question. Critical Thinker says thoughts on James Tynion the Fourth's Detective Comics run. I have not read it. As I've said before on the channel, I kind of stopped reading comics in like 2021 because I had so many to read that I owned, and I didn't buy any more. So I stopped after King's run, and Tynan's, or actually Tynan's detective run. I was thinking his Batman run. I have read his detective run actually. Really, really liked it. I was I completely blanked there. Yes, so he did detective, and then he took over for King on Batman. But yeah, I really liked it. Something different, breath of fresh air. I liked the team. Um, I liked Clayface being a part of it as well. It was a lot of fun. I had a good time with it for the most part. I don't think personally, like, I know you don't like King's Run that much, Critical Thinker, and like I said before, I don't like the second half of King's Run, but I did enjoy a lot of singular stories in the first half. I never thought he had an arc that was that great, but there were a lot of good one-offs, one-shots. He had a couple of really great annuals, good story with Swamp Thing, some great stories with Superman. So there are more like things that stuck out, and I remembered them in King's Run, which was going on simultaneously with Tynan's detective. But there were less. I think overall detective was a little more consistent. um, Critical Thinker says, what's your single favorite Star Wars comic run, specifically referring to runs rather than individual stories? For example, Star Wars 15, Star Wars 2020, Vader 15, Vader 17, Republic, KOTOR, Legacy, Afra, etc. That one's really tough, and I always feel like I have to qualify it as Legends and canon, and I know it's very difficult to compare. The only reason is just because Legends told stories that were so much more expansive, and like you couldn't help but read those and still feel like you were getting something really significant out of the story. Also, Legends runs were mostly a longer. So like I feel like my favorite single run of all time is and has been for a long time. It was one of the first things I read was KOTOR. I just love KOTOR. And it was so fun and so good, and it had a lot of great story, and it ran for a long time. Republic, I would say Republic because there were highs for Republic, but Republic doesn't really have too many highs until you get to Quinlan, which is like 5 volumes in. And then after that, when it gets to Clone Wars, it's like consistently great. But before Clone Wars, it's like, unless Quinlan's involved, it's kind of mediocre to bad. And I've even been rereading it recently. I got my hands on um, the first half, which I haven't read in years, and I found the old trades at a comic shop, and I reread it, a lot of it at the end of last year, beginning of this year. I was like, man, some of these first volumes are still very rough. For canon, it's absolutely Vader 17, and that's definitely in my top like 2 3 comic runs for Star Wars ever. It's just so good. It's not quite as expansive, right? It's a very much so a character study, but as for character study comics, it's probably the single best character study comic we've ever gotten in for Star Wars. And so I do really love what Charles Soule did there. Easily my favorite canon book in Star Wars, or canon comic book. Legacy is right on that outside because I do love a lot of things about Legacy. I don't think it's the hardest hitting story, but I think it's fun and creative and really different, which is always enjoyable to read. Um, Trying to think of any other specific ones I want to bring up. Yeah, those, and Republic as well. It's hard to call it a run because usually a run indicates a single writer, single artist, combo, duo, and Republic had multiple throughout its run. So it is also hard to call that a run. Whereas KOTOR, Legacy, Vader, those are all, I would say, legitimately runs. So I would say KOTOR and Vader are probably my top two.
Yeah, I'll answer this in the same way. I think when it comes to Legends, the thing that captured my attention was Tales of the Jedi. I mean, it was always something that I liked seeing, like, archaic Jedi, and I always kinda wanted it to be a little bit more so. It's all great stuff to me. I've never had any single issues with some of the runs, like, there's some runs where it's like, okay, like you're going back to Obendor and, like, stuff that's happening, like, 200, 300 years before, and you're like, "Okay," and then the old Frida Nod uprising stuff, you're like, "Oh, okay, like, what does that really do to inform the current state of things?" But then once it catches up to Exar Kun and Eula Qwaldroma and his fall, right, like, then you're like, "Oh, okay, I get, like, why they did this," right? So, some sequencing issues a little bit, and I do think, like, maybe the first 2 arcs of Ulick are a little too rushed and a little too bland. Like, I wish that we could have actually spent time with him and his brother as characters and, like, them kind of infiltrating and how, like, it's a whole trajectory for him from being a young Padawan up to being a Jedi Knight, and, then the Sunriders start coming in and all that, and I think that would have been made it a little bit weightier because you don't need that for Exar Kun. You only need his, like, little origin and then catching him up to where he is, but Ulick is Anakin before Anakin in the prequels, and I think still arguably he's better written than Anakin, especially with how his story is concluded. But yeah, I liked a lot of Tales. I think it has moments where it falters for sure, don't get me wrong, but the way it concludes with, like, that little final arc for Ulick stripped of his powers, and then, like, the heartwarming tragedy of it all by the end, you're like, "Man, that's really cool," and it's just a shame that we don't get to see Vima Sunrider actually be the character of Bastila Shan. Like, if she was, then, man, it would've been so much better connected. I still don't think it needed to be just because there's just such strange differences between the technology of Tales of the Jedi and KOTOR. KOTOR by KOTOR 2 is just way too, like, prequel energy, prequel technology, prequel robes, everything like that. But if they had found a nice little middle ground, I think this could have been a fascinating bridge. In a way, copyright law stopped us from having, like, a really nice fleshed out bridge there, but in another way, it allows it to be its own separate era, so, I'll at least appreciate that. But yeah, I'm always been a fan of Tales of the Jedi. I think that's where Veitch is actually stretching himself. Dark Empire just starts becoming I like the first run enough. The second, I like the stuff on Osis, but I do think he needed to have Light Rider come out to make it a little bit more worthwhile. I know I got Liam a copy of that, so one day we'll probably review it of some sorts, but by 3, I was like, "What are you doing here?" Like, and even he himself didn't seem like he's interested, like, he was no longer the only writer, he was, like, a co-writer on it too, so yeah, it's kinda shocking to me, like, despite the legacy of Dark Empire, like, it's really just not that great by the end versus Tales of the Jedi, I argue, gets better and better and actually has nice development, nice world building and everything that, really played to his strengths and to the ideas that he had, and I think if he had just been allowed to stay in that area and never really did, like, a Dark Empire more than past the first run, I think he would have had an even greater legacy and probably a even more of a better connection with Lucasfilm to continue building out that era. And who knows how the KOTOR era would have turned out with him, like, sticking around and having a little bit more say. When it comes to canon, same as Liam, I am a big fan of the 2017 Vader run. I think it's fantastic, the length is correct. 25 issues, you don't need to go super long, like, I defend a lot of, like, Vader 2020 and all that, but there is repetition. Crossovers and all that definitely do at least excuse 10 to 12 issues, but that's still a lot. Like, and, like, you best parts of it are, like, the beginning and the ending when they bring back a lot of the characters from the original couple arcs that were, like, "Whoa, really good there." But I will give a little bit of a special shout out to Karen Gillan's Vader in 2015. I think the transformation of Vader in 4 to 5 is something that we don't really think about in the movies, but you're just like, "Oh, he's just a really strong, powerful bad guy," but for him to be the leader of a whole fleet, like, and have a super star destroyer and all that, versus just, like, being shut up by Tarkin in episode 4, I think Gillen did a fantastic job analyzing it, and he had a lot of great original characters, a lot of prequel tie-ins in a way that I don't think that early canon was truly ready for, and I think if it had come out more like 2017, 2018, probably gets a lot more praise for it because it does a lot of world building, a lot of bridging between prequel and original trilogy stuff happening. And I think it's just fascinating just to see what they did with Vader and the aftermath of episode 4. It's not just him, how does it affect the Empire? Super well handled there. And when he gets to come to the Star Wars 2015 line, I think that's when it actually turns into something great. I think Jason Aaron does some cool stuff with characterization, like, he makes you really feel like you're picking up, like, the very next days after episode 4. But, like, storytelling felt a little bit hit or miss for me by the time he'd come to the end of his run. Once we got to Gillen, we are actually dealing with stuff in Rogue One, we're starting to deal with, like, heavier hitting stuff. Characters that are original get to shine a bit more, they feel level-headed and equal to a lot of the original trilogy cast, and that was just something I felt Aaron kind of got right in the first couple issues before you realize he doesn't really care about the huge arcs per se, right? He doesn't really care about transforming them, and then once you got Gillen in there, he was like, "Oh yeah, I'm putting them on track." It's just a shame that Greg Pak came in for that one absolutely unnecessary arc by the end of 2015 because I read it just 'cause for completionism, but honestly, the end of Gillen's run literally has the original 3 walking up on the ramp of Millennium Falcon. You could end there. You don't need anything there. There's nothing about, oh, like, finding out about that bounty hunter on Ord Mantell and all that. You know, there's all these, like, sorta quite like getting to the things happening in Greg's run, and then not really, and I think it just takes away from, him, Gillen, and Aaron ultimately having a very solid run combined, but yeah, ending with a pack was a mistake, so I think it just brings down the whole thing. So, yeah, anything Gillen touches, I think is great. It just so happens to be that Charles Soule got to do a really, really intense character study of Vader that I don't think anything in Canon and Legends has touched to the same degree. He's informed all the writing about Vader since then. That influence that he has, like, I think Gillen should have had a bit more with his 2015 run, but the detail of post-episode 3, Anakin transforming into Vader had never really been touched that well besides, I guess, Dark Lord of the Sith, but I still prefer 2017 run any day.
Critical Thinker's next question was, how would you guys adapt the Battle of Jabim from the Republic comics into canon? Would you set it before the Clone Wars, keep it largely unchanged, or set it during the Clone Wars and alter it, including Ahsoka? I think you'd have to include Ahsoka. Well, you don't have to include Ahsoka, but you have to set it during the Clone Wars TV show because of the way Anakin gets knighted now so early into canon story or the Clone Wars TV show story, which is now shifted. If I know I've gotten a lot of pushback on my timeline for Clone Wars, but it is the correct timeline. Doesn't matter what you guys feel; it's how Lucasfilm says it. Uh, you all this stuff is now because TV shows are a higher level of canon and legends. Everything from Clone Wars multimedia project, save for the last or for 80% of Volume 2 of Clone Wars, everything after the Battle of Hypori is now before within like the first year of the Clone Wars, which is unfortunate. I'm not saying I like that. I just it is the way they present it now, and has been presented since 2008. Uh, but with that being said, I think if you were to change it and do a Battle of Jabim in canon, like an actual version that really does correctly fit with Star Wars, the Clone Wars, I do think you'd put it early in the Clone Wars. Personally, I'd prefer to see it almost stay the same, just happen with now a knighted Anakin, but still maybe in like kind of the aftermath of Brotherhood, where like, yes, they are now in the novel, they see each other. Obi-Wan and Anakin start to see each other as brothers versus master and apprentice versus father and son. But there could still be rough patches between them because the Battle of Jabim is such a great arc for growing that relationship and growing Obi-Wan and growing Anakin. It's something very important for Anakin's early days in the war. You've got to still do it where he's pretty fresh to being a leader, being a commander, and where really the Jedi in general are fresh to that. So I'd still put it I'd put it, like, right at the beginning of Clone Wars, like, before the movie, before any of the Christophsis stuff, before the first episodes, like the trench episode of Clone Wars. Like, if you were putting it, it would be before all that stuff, but it would have to be after Brotherhood, after he's knighted, so that would be the big change is you'd have a knighted Anakin versus an apprentice Anakin, but other than that, I'd keep it largely very similar.
I wanna say it still can happen before the knighting, because I do think it's important for it to happen. It's just the way that Brotherhood's written, it's kinda hard to, like, fit it in. I think it can work, I just think you don't have the character of a Shard Het. I think you cut him out entirely. He's interesting, but he's not really developed per se to the where he is by the time he becomes the character that Obi-Wan duels on Tatooine and cuts off his arm and leaves him to die by the traditions of the Tusken Warriors, right? And then his rise into the one Sith through Fate of the Jedi and then Legacy Comics, like, crazy, crazy arc in general, I will say that. I don't think it was truly necessary in Legends, and I don't think it would be necessary in canon. I think he's a character you can be separated from, and I think the reason why it still probably would have happened, like, timeline-wise between, like, what we see in '03 Clone Wars leading into '08 Clone Wars, I guess Brotherhood being right before '08 Clone Wars, is because of the Obi-Wan Kenobi show. We know at one point in production, they wanted to spend way more time on Jabeam as a planet and use it as part of the flashbacks. There's a lot of rumors around that, and I think it would have been way more heavier and meatier for Vader to return to that site where he's first, like, taking his real steps into, like, I mean, yes, you could say he took his first step on Tatooine, killing the Tusken Raiders and the families, and the woman and the children too and all that, but I think for him as, becoming the martial military leader that eventually is necessary to be Vader, that begins on Jabim, right? And you see him try to revive people with, like, Force lightning and all, like, he breaks down, and Obi-Wan is separated from presumed dead and all that, like, there is a lot that that separation can do, and I still think that fits in. I just think the scope has to change to being slightly smaller if it's set before. It can still happen after his knighting. I like it being, like, almost like the concluding break of him. Like, he doesn't become the hero without fear until the fear overwhelms him and breaks and shatters him, and he's forced to, like, pick up pieces and lead. Because when we see '03 Anakin, he's got a cool custom Delta 7. He's ignoring everything Obi-Wan's saying, and sure, he beats Asajj down, and then the next time you see him in, like, volume 2, he's getting knighted. I'm like, "Okay, like, I guess it works with all the multimedia stuff, like, to have that gap," but assuming none of that multimedia stuff in the comics and the books happens, you still I think you still can fit in Jabim. You just have to cut out a lot of stuff before and after. You have to almost have him be confident in himself and not realizing what he tapped into when he killed Asajj, and then have that happen and be like, "Oh, like, Asajj is still alive and, like, I'm being outdone," and all that. We still don't really have a clear explanation for his scar either in canon, right? Like, he just has it by the start of '08, so it'd be very interesting to have her and be a little bit more of a presence and all that, so I still think it can happen before. It would just kinda have to be like how Dark Disciple is. It's like an 8-episode equivalent arc that transitions us from Hypori into the beginning of Brotherhood where he gets knighted. I think that's the only way it works for me, before the Clone Wars and before Brotherhood's knighting. I I don't know. I just think that, like, Anakin's transition into, like, learning and training Ahsoka, having that be placed at the start just because of timeline reasoning, it like, I get it, but it's just I'm like, it just doesn't sit right with me because I think the whole point is that he is confident, he is doing great, and now it's like, well, here's here's something to knock you down a level. Now you gotta train somebody, right? And having a Clone Wars timeline, like, I get it, but I think Clone Wars '03 timeline leading into that, I think that's still my preferred route.
Well, I think we should move on to our next topic here as the stream continues to wind down. But guys, make sure you keep firing in those questions because once we finish this topic, it's going to be all your guys' questions rest of the stream. So fire in those to the chat. If you'd like to send a super chat, guarantees you on tonight's show. If not, send it into your question into the chat, and it will be first come, first serve. But we have another topic to talk about slash clarify that was kind of big over the last week, and that was the rumor slash news that came out last week that Ewan McGregor announced basically that he was going to be in Ahsoka season 2. Now there was a lot of digging around this because it was at a public event that he said this, and there were some people who got on Twitter and was like, "Ewan McGregor said he's going to be in Ahsoka season 2." Well, it has since been pretty much all but confirmed that that was false. He was referring to his wife, Mary Elizabeth Winstead, who is playing Hera and has played Hera since season one, filming Ahsoka season two currently. Doesn't mean he won't be in it. We'll talk a little bit about whether we want to see Obi-Wan in it or not, but the quote that he was misquoted with was specifically about his wife. Originally, it was reported that he said, "We begin shooting season two of Ahsoka soon." Wait, was I supposed to say that? And then it was changed to, "Well, I like watching my wife, so I really enjoyed Ahsoka season two or season one. I thought that was brilliantly done. It's so fun. Like, she's shooting the second season right now, and I know, wait, is that a secret?" So it was changed once the actual manuscript came out of people's recording of the actual event versus what somebody put on Twitter. So Obi-Wan, Ewan McGregor has not confirmed he is in Ahsoka season two. That being said, I mean, it's been a topic since Ahsoka season one, since really episode five when we saw the Clone Wars flashback. And then at the end of the show, when we saw Hayden Christensen Force Ghost, should Ewan McGregor, should Obi-Wan appear in Ahsoka season two? Let's answer that right now. And for me personally, I would love to see him. I mean, I love Obi-Wan. He's my favorite Star Wars character of all time. He has been since I was 4 years old. I'd love to see him take over the reins as Force Ghost as much as I love Alec Guinness. Obviously, he can't be a Force Ghost anymore. So I'm okay with aging Ewan McGregor up, making him look old like Alec Guinness, and making him a Force Ghost because I would love to see how that plays off with Hayden. Will that Filoni does contradict canon quite often, but he plays it safe a lot of times when it comes to stuff like this. So I do I see him having Obi-Wan as a Force Ghost in this? Maybe only as a voice. I don't necessarily see him going full Force Ghost with Obi-Wan. But that being said, we already saw a flashback to Clone Wars in season one. The question been on a lot of people's mind is, could we get a flashback to the Clone Wars in season two with Anakin, Ahsoka, and Obi-Wan? I'd love to see him there. That would be an awesome place to see him. But regardless, be thrilled if they announced that he was in the season. Probably be more thrilled if they don't announce it and then we see him in the season and it's a surprise, because it's always better if it's a surprise. But if he's not in it, it's not a must. But what do you think, Sonic? Do you think Obi-Wan could/should appear in Ahsoka season two?
I'm always of the opinion that less is more, and by the time we're at in the timeline, he is kinda transitioned over to his relationship with Luke, right? And I think that's fine. Like, we can still have him as a Force ghost, but does he really need to show up to Ahsoka per se? Now, the thing is, we are gonna be exploring more about the world between worlds. We're gonna explore way more about Mortis and all that. I would not be surprised if we're gonna have some sort of Mortis-esque arc where as they're walking through the structures, whatever ancient temples and, pieces that have like, I wouldn't be surprised if we kinda redo the Mortis arc just with Ahsoka now as fully the lead. I'd love to see, like, her kinda step into, like, the adult version that she witnesses right now. She kinda looks back and sees the younger version of her. Like, I'd love to see a little bit more of that characterization and an inverse of that happening. Obi-Wan, I think can work, but I'd like it to be a bit more tied to, now the more formal declaration between Ahsoka and Sabine of their apprentice-master relationship. I think Ahsoka has kinda blocked off so much of herself until she goes through the world between worlds experience and her lessons from Anakin, like, like, it doesn't really matter, like, you survived. You didn't turn bad, you didn't turn evil, you just kept going, right? And that was what was necessary, that's what you needed to do. Okay, now that you've gone through that, now that you've recaptured a little bit more of your original essence, how does that apply to this relationship with this apprentice that you kinda had this, like, one false start, especially an apprentice that kinda has still dealt the galaxy a pretty devastating blow by letting Thrawn come back, right? So it's like, okay, who am I gonna go to for guidance? Is it gonna be Anakin? I mean, a little bit, but not more for, like, personality, more for, like, how do I handle someone as hot-headed as Sabine? And then Anakin could be like, "Yeah, I mean, Snips, you were too, like, and that's why they've assigned me to you." But I think for, like, really understanding a little bit more of, like, bridging older and younger personalities of herself. I think that's where Obi-Wan can kinda come through, and I think it'd be more of Obi-Wan giving advice to Ahsoka as opposed to having Obi-Wan and Anakin interacting together. I think the only serious interaction I wanna see is almost him, like, presenting a vision of the bonfire scene from the Crystal Crisis arc of, like, like, I truly believe that I done everything right, like, despite all these ups and downs, despite all the mistakes that I had already admitted to, I thought Anakin would be fine, right? But look what happened, right? And he's like, "Look, I know, you got worries about Sabine and all that, but I made those same mistakes too. I need you to understand it and see that for yourself, like, we've had this conversation of sorts." I think that's the only real Obi-Wan Anakin interaction I want, and it's gotta be for the purpose of Ahsoka and through Obi-Wan's lesson for her. I don't want it to be Obi-Wan and Anakin get screen time, and, like, I'll enjoy it, don't get me wrong, but I don't want it to take away from the fact that this is now centered on Ahsoka and Sabine and Baylan, what's going on there between those 3 characters as they explore Mortis and all that. I think he should just be an add-on, he should be a clarification. He shouldn't necessarily have a back and forth with Anakin. I think that can be saved for supplementary material, I think that can be saved for, them doing a Clone Wars flashback, but anything World Between Worlds, I think just keep it to, like, this is for your sake, Ahsoka. This is, like, a lesson that you're asking for subconsciously, and you pulled me as opposed to pulling Anakin in this situation. Anakin's gonna go through his own journey. I truly think Anakin, we're gonna see a lot of him, but I don't think we necessarily need Obi-Wan to have more than, like, a glimpse here and there with Anakin. It should be mostly centered around Ahsoka.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it doesn't make that much sense to have him. I still would love to see him in the show because it is an Ahsoka show. It's not an Anakin show. And Obi-Wan, even though he's there with Ahsoka often, he's not directly involved with her. So like you said, I think some imparting some wisdom as a master would be very cool. I would love to see Anakin get significant play in this season, and if he does, I'd love to see Obi-Wan. But this story is already so jam-packed. It doesn't have to have Obi-Wan, but I think if we do see him, it will be purely a cameo for one episode slash maybe a recurring voice or somebody who appears for advice every once in a while. He's not going to have an arc in and of himself. But I think that's going to do it for our stream this week. A little shorter stream, but thank you guys for joining tonight's show. Make sure you like the video if you haven't. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. We go live every Tuesday night, so you can join us and talk Star Wars or talk whatever you want. We talked a little DC, talked a little Marvel tonight. It's always fun time. If you're just finding us, make sure you subscribe and tune in every single week. If you are subscribed, make sure you're checking out the rest of our content. We have other great content on the channel. We still have shorts coming out. We've got our new videos. Like I said, Bad Batch review, Bad Batch Sanctuary review just came up on the channel. Make sure you check that out. If you haven't, make sure you check out the High Republic coverage. We have a lot of High Republic wrap up coming out here this week and the next week or two. So make sure you check all that stuff out as well. Vote in the polls twice a day, every day, 7 a.m., 1 p.m. Pacific times. Thank you so much for watching tonight's stream, everybody. And we will see you all next week for the next live stream and Q.